Here's the first part of your story. Get ready for a surprising twist right from the start. Remember to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. The tycoon's unexpected choice. A waitress's compassion changes everything. Welcome to our channel. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring narratives. Tears silently streamed down Valerie Mitchell's face as her young son, Danny, once again rejected the food his father offered. The expensive therapies and numerous hired professionals hadn't helped 5-year-old Danny, who suffered from severe autism, to feed himself or accept food from others. It was then that she noticed a young waitress timidly approaching their table. The young woman, Carmen, knelt to the child's level and, with a gentle smile, began interacting with him in a way that Alexander Thorne, a successful entrepreneur and owner of one of New York's largest construction companies, had never witnessed before. In a matter of minutes, his son was holding a spoon and bringing food to his mouth, something highly paid specialists hadn't achieved in years of therapy. "How did you do that?" Alexander asked, his eyes fixed on the almost miraculous scene unfolding before him. "Oh, sir, it's nothing special," Carmen replied simply. "My younger brother is also autistic. I learned some techniques that work well with him." Alexander observed the young woman intently. She couldn't have been more than 25. She wore the simple uniform of the high-end restaurant in Manhattan's upscale Soho district. Her dark hair, pulled back in a ponytail, and her gentle smile conveyed a calm that, inexplicably, had won Danny's trust. "Do you have studies in this area?" the still incredulous businessman questioned. "I started studying psychology but had to pause when my grandmother got sick," she explained, helping Danny hold the spoon better. "Now I'm saving up to go back to school." In that moment, Alexander Thorne, known for his coldness in business and his millionaire fortune, felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Since Danny's diagnosis and the illness that took his wife, Isabel, 3 years prior, he had retreated into a rigid, solitary routine, splitting his time between business and raising a son with whom he could barely communicate. "Young lady, what's your full name?" he asked, already pulling out his phone. "Carmen Rodriguez, sir," she replied, noticing the shift in the man's demeanor. "Did something happen?" "Perhaps something very good just happened, Carmen," he said, putting his phone away after jotting something down. "You can't imagine what this small moment means to the two of us." The waitress smiled, not fully grasping the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. For her, helping the child was simply a natural gesture. For Alexander, it was the first light after years of darkness. What do you think of Carmen's intuitive approach? Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness make a huge difference? Share your stories below. A father's quest and a surprising offer. That night, in his mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, Alexander couldn't get the image of his son eating by himself out of his head. Danny was now sleeping peacefully, a rarity in recent weeks. The businessman sat in his office and began searching on his computer. He needed to know more about the waitress who had achieved in minutes what years of expensive therapies had not. His personal assistant, Hector, knocked on the office door. "Sir, I have the information you requested about the young lady from the restaurant," he said, handing him a folder. Alexander quickly reviewed the contents. Carmen Rodriguez, 24 years old, born in upstate New York, moved to the city at 18 to study psychology. She paused her studies in her 3rd year when her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents' passing, became seriously ill. She had worked at Leo's Trot Gourmet restaurant for just over a year, with no criminal record, no significant debts except for partially paid student loans. "Is that all?" Alexander asked, expecting something more revealing. "Well, she's known at the restaurant for her attentive service to customers. She's never had any disciplinary issues," Hector added. "And I found something interesting. She developed her own communication method for autistic children, inspired by her experience with her brother. She even presented a paper on it at university before leaving her program." Alexander Thorne leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. His instinct as a successful businessman rarely failed him, and something about this waitress had captured his attention. It wasn't just that she had gotten Danny to eat by himself, but the naturalness with which she treated him, without that look of pity he was used to receiving. "Hector, I want you to invite her here, as a consultant to help with Danny," he finally said. "Offer her a generous compensation, something she can't refuse." "Are you sure, sir?" Hector, always cautious, questioned. "We barely know this young woman." "I'm sure." "Danny connected with her in a way I've never seen before," Alexander replied with a determined gaze. "And I'm willing to try anything to help my son." What Alexander didn't know was that his mother, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, administrator of the family's financial empire since the premature death of his father, would not look kindly upon the introduction of a stranger into their lives. He also didn't know that Carmen carried a more complex past than her profile suggested. A past that made her wary of deep involvement and had taught her to keep her distance from powerful people. A manager's surprise and Carmen's dilemma. The next morning, Carmen arrived at work as usual, taking 2 buses from her small apartment in Brooklyn to the restaurant in Soho. She was thinking about the child she had helped the day before, and how he reminded her of her brother, Michael, now 17, who lived with an aunt in upstate New York after their grandmother's passing. "Carmen, the manager wants to speak with you," Sophia, her coworker, informed her as she entered. "And it sounds serious." With a sigh, Carmen headed to Mr. Ramirez's office, the restaurant manager. She knew she had broken protocol by sitting with a customer the day before, but she couldn't resist seeing the child's distress. "Ms. Rodriguez," Mr. Ramirez began, adjusting his glasses, "I received a complaint about your behavior yesterday. Restaurant policy is clear regarding customer contact." "I understand, Mr. Ramirez, but that child was having a crisis and—" "I'm not finished," he interrupted, raising a hand. "Also, I received a call from Mr. Alexander Thorne's office this morning. Apparently, he was very impressed with your service." The manager opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "He asked me to give you this. It's an invitation for an interview at his residence," he explained, extending the envelope. "And he made it clear that you are excused from work for as long as needed to attend this appointment." Carmen took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was thick and had a golden emblem with the initials AT. "Who exactly is this client, Mr. Ramirez?" she asked, sensing there was something bigger behind it. "Goodness, girl, you didn't recognize Alexander Thorne?" The manager seemed surprised. "He owns the Thorne Group, one of the largest construction companies in the country. He's a millionaire, a constant fixture in business magazines, and, from what I gather, he wants to hire you to help his son." Carmen felt her stomach drop. She always avoided getting too involved with clients, especially the rich and powerful. Her experience had taught her that people with money often believed they could buy anything, including people. "When would this interview be?" she asked, still hesitant. "This afternoon. A driver will pick you up at 2, the manager replied, now with a calculating smile. "This could be very good for the restaurant, Carmen, and for you too, obviously." Leaving the manager's office, Carmen found all her colleagues looking at her curiously. News traveled fast in the restaurant. "What happened?" Sophia asked, approaching. "Is it true you're going to work for Alexander Thorne?" "I don't even know what it's about yet," Carmen replied, putting the envelope in her bag. "I just helped a child who was struggling to eat. A child who happens to be the son of one of the richest men in New York," Sophia exclaimed. "Girl, this is your chance to get out of this place and finally go back to college." Carmen just smiled, but her heart felt heavy. She wanted to help the child, but she feared what might happen if she entered the world of that powerful family. The last time she trusted someone with money and influence, she almost lost everything, including her dignity. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot as we're starting out. Now let's continue. A ride to riches and a widower's story. At exactly 2 o'clock, a uniformed driver waited for Carmen at the restaurant door. The car, a black Mercedes-Benz with tinted windows, attracted curious glances from passers-by and other employees discreetly peeking from the establishment's window. "Ms. Rodriguez?" The driver, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, asked. I'm Robert, Mr. Thorne's driver. I'm here to take you to his residence. Carmen nodded, feeling out of place in her waitress uniform. She hadn't had time to go home and change. I'm a bit underdressed for an interview, she commented, gesturing to her uniform. Don't worry about that, miss, Robert replied with a slight smile. Mr. Thorne was very clear that no formalities were needed. During the drive, Carmen watched as the city gradually changed as they approached Greenwich. The streets became wider, the sidewalks more tree-lined, and buildings gave way to mansions hidden behind tall walls and elaborate gates. Is this your first time in Greenwich? Robert asked, noticing her curious gaze. Yes, she replied simply. I never had a reason to come to this part of the city. Mr. Thorne lives in one of the largest properties in the area, the driver commented. The main house was designed by his late wife, who was an architect. He's a widower? Carmen asked, remembering that she hadn't seen a mother figure with the child at the restaurant. Yes, Mrs. Isabel passed away 3 years ago, Robert replied, his tone softer. It was a great loss for everyone, especially for little Danny. She fell ill shortly after his diagnosis. Carmen felt a pang of compassion. Losing his mother so young, especially for a child with autism who already faced so many challenges in understanding the world, must have been devastating. Finally, the car stopped in front of an imposing gate. After a brief verification, the gates opened, revealing a long driveway lined with manicured trees. At the end of the path, a contemporary-style mansion stood imposingly, with large windows and clean architectural lines. We've arrived, miss, Robert announced, parking the car near the main entrance. Carmen got out of the vehicle, feeling tiny amidst the grandeur of the place. A woman in her 50s, dressed in simple but elegant clothes, waited at the door. Welcome, Ms. Rodriguez, she said with a warm smile. I'm Maria, the housekeeper. Mr. Thorne is waiting for you in his office, and Danny is in his occupational therapy session right now. Maria guided Carmen through an impressive double-height foyer with a curved staircase leading to the second floor. The walls displayed artworks that Carmen recognized as by renowned American artists. It's a beautiful house, Carmen commented, trying to hide her nervousness. Mrs. Isabel had impeccable taste, Maria replied with a nostalgic tone. She made an effort to highlight national art in every detail of the decoration. Reaching a dark wooden door at the end of a hallway, Maria knocked softly. Mr. Thorne, Ms. Rodriguez is here, she announced. Come in. A deep voice responded from the other side. Maria opened the door and gestured for Carmen to enter. The office was a spacious area, with bookshelves covering an entire wall, an imposing desk near windows overlooking a well-kept garden, and a seating area with leather sofas. Alexander Thorne was standing near the window looking outside. Hearing the door close, he turned to look at Carmen. He wore a light blue dress shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark trousers. Without the formal restaurant attire, he seemed younger and less intimidating, though his posture still emanated authority. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming, he said, approaching to greet her. Please, make yourself comfortable. Carmen shook the extended hand, surprised by the firmness of the gesture. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Thorne, but I confess I'm a bit confused about the reason, she replied sincerely. An unconventional offer and a father's plea. Alexander gestured to the sofas, inviting her to sit. I think you're too modest to understand the impact you had yesterday, he began, sitting on the opposite sofa. What you did with Danny was extraordinary. It was just a moment of connection, Mr. Thorne, Carmen replied, trying to downplay it. Children with autism often respond well when approached according to their needs. It may seem simple to you, but for us it was revolutionary, he said with intensity in his gaze. Danny doesn't let anyone close easily. We have a team of trained professionals. Psychologists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. None of them managed to establish such an immediate connection as you did. Alexander stood and walked to his desk, taking a folder. I learned that you studied psychology and developed your own communication method for autistic children, he continued, and that you left your studies to care for your grandmother. Carmen felt uncomfortable with the amount of information he had about her. How did you know all this? She asked, trying not to sound accusatory. I have resources, Ms. Rodriguez, he replied bluntly. And when it comes to my son's well-being, I don't hesitate to use them. I understand your concern for your son, Mr. Thorne, Carmen said, choosing her words carefully. But I still don't understand what you expect from me. Alexander sat down again, leaning slightly forward. I want to offer you a job, Ms. Rodriguez, as Danny's therapeutic companion, he said directly. With a salary 5 times higher than what you currently earn, plus benefits like health insurance, housing support, and, if you wish, funding to finish your studies. Carmen blinked, stunned by the proposal. Mr. Thorne, I don't have formal credentials for this, she replied, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. I didn't finish my degree. I don't have certifications. You have something more valuable, a natural connection with my son, Alexander interrupted, and practical experience with your brother. Diplomas can come later if you wish. What interests me is the ability you've already demonstrated. I don't know if it would be ethical to accept a position for which I'm not formally qualified, Carmen argued, though she felt her heart race at the possibility of returning to university. Alexander observed her with interest, unaccustomed to receiving rejections. Your ethical concern is admirable, Ms. Rodriguez, he commented. But let me clarify, you wouldn't be replacing the professionals who already attend to Danny. You would be a complement, someone who could bridge the gap between him and the world. And of course, between him and his father. The last sentence was spoken with a vulnerability that surprised Carmen. For a moment, the powerful businessman gave way to a father who simply didn't know how to connect with his own child. I'd like to get to know Danny better before making any decision, she finally said. A few minutes of interaction in the restaurant aren't enough to know if I can truly help him consistently. A discreet smile appeared on Alexander's face. That can be arranged, he replied, standing up. In fact, Danny's occupational therapy session must be ending now. Would you like to join him for his snack? It's usually a complicated time. Carmen nodded, following Alexander out of the office. As they walked down the hallway, she noticed the decor in more detail. There were family photos. A younger Alexander alongside a beautiful woman with light brown hair and a luminous smile, presumably Isabel. Photos of baby Danny and some of Alexander with an elegant lady who appeared to be his mother. They arrived at a spacious, well-lit room, clearly adapted to Danny's needs. There were various sensory resources, soft lights, different textures on the walls, and custom-sized furniture. A young woman was putting away therapeutic materials while Danny sat in a corner, engrossed in a tablet. Good afternoon, Dr. Evans, Alexander greeted. How was the session today? Quite productive, Mr. Thorne, the therapist replied with a smile. We worked on fine motor coordination, and Danny showed significant progress. The therapist noticed Carmen and cast an inquisitive glance. This is Carmen Rodriguez, Alexander introduced. She's a consultant helping us with new approaches for Danny. Dr. Evans extended her hand with a professional smile, but her eyes showed slight suspicion. Nice to meet you. It's always good to have more support on the team, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Well, I'm done for today. Danny's snack is ready on the table as always. The therapist quickly said goodbye and left, leaving Alexander, Carmen, and Danny alone. The child remained focused on his tablet, unaware of their presence. Danny often gets engrossed in his educational games, Alexander explained in a low voice. It's hard to get him to stop and eat. If you were Carmen, what would be your biggest hesitation about accepting this job? Share your thoughts. A breakthrough and a father's awe. Carmen observed the child. With light brown, slightly wavy hair, expressive eyes, and delicate features, he strongly resembled the woman in the photos. He wore a light blue t-shirt and comfortable cotton pants. May I approach him? She asked Alexander. Of course, but he usually ignores new people, the father warned. Carmen approached slowly, sitting on the floor at a respectful distance. She didn't speak immediately, just observed what he was doing on the tablet. A shape and color matching game. "You're very good at this," she commented softly after a few minutes, without looking directly at him. "My brother loves this game too." Danny didn't respond, but his fingers paused for an instant, indicating he had heard. Carmen continued commenting casually about the game, without demanding a response or eye contact. She noticed the child casting furtive glances at her. "It's almost snack time, Danny," she said in the same calm tone. "There's carrot cake today. My brother Michael loves carrot cake, especially with chocolate on top." Surprisingly, Danny briefly looked up. Carmen smiled, but didn't force prolonged eye contact. "When my brother was little, we had a system for eating," she continued, maintaining a conversational tone. "He could choose the order of the foods as long as he ate everything in the end. That made him feel like he had control over the situation." Slowly, Carmen got up and walked to the table where the prepared snack was. Carrot cake, some fruit cut into small pieces, and a glass of juice. "Look, I guessed right, it's carrot cake," she commented with gentle enthusiasm. "Danny, would you prefer to start with the cake or the fruit?" To Alexander's surprise, who was watching the scene intently, Danny got up, put his tablet aside, and walked to the table. He stopped next to Carmen and pointed to the cake. "Good choice," she said, pulling up a chair for him. "We'll start with the cake then." Danny sat down and allowed Carmen to place a napkin on his lap. When she offered him a piece of cake on a fork, he accepted it but immediately took the fork from her hands, preferring to eat by himself. Alexander watched the scene with a mix of astonishment and emotion. Normally, Danny's meals were exhausting battles, with much resistance and often ending with little to no food eaten. Seeing his son interact like this with someone he had just met was almost surreal. "Very good, Danny," Carmen praised when he finished the cake. "Now it's time for the fruit. Which one do you want first?" The child pointed to a piece of melon and, again, ate by himself. When he finished the snack, Danny surprised his father even more by picking up his glass and drinking the juice without spilling, something he normally refused to do without help. "Excellent job, Danny," Carmen said, without exaggerating the praise, maintaining a natural tone. "You ate everything very well." The child returned to his tablet, but first cast a quick glance at Carmen, which for a child with autism represented a significant level of recognition. A question of ethics and a difficult decision. Alexander approached Carmen with an expression that mixed gratitude and awe. "How did you?" he began, but couldn't finish the question. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, sir," Carmen replied sincerely. "I just respected his timing. I offered him clear choices and didn't create expectations that could cause him anxiety. Our team of specialists has tried these approaches for years," Alexander said, still impressed. "What is it about you that's different?" Carmen reflected for a moment before answering. "Perhaps it's because I don't see him first as a diagnosis or a set of symptoms," she explained. "For me, Danny is a child who perceives the world differently, and my job is to try to understand that perception, not impose my own." Alexander nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Ms. Rodriguez, I hope you reconsider my offer," he said seriously. "You just achieved in 15 minutes what we haven't managed in months of intensive therapy." Carmen looked at Danny, who seemed comfortable and relaxed after the snack, something Alexander indicated was rare. "I need to think about it, sir," she replied. "It's an important decision that would affect my life in several ways." "I understand," he said. "May I ask what makes you hesitate? Is the salary not attractive enough?" "It's not about money," Carmen explained, choosing her words carefully. "It's about responsibility. Danny needs consistency in his life. I don't want to create bonds that could later break and cause more harm than good." What Carmen didn't say was that she also feared getting too emotionally involved. After the traumatic experience of losing her grandmother and having to move away from her brother, she had built barriers to protect herself. Working so closely with a family, especially a vulnerable child, meant risking suffering again. "To help you with your decision," Alexander said, I'm willing to offer an initial 3-month contract with a possibility of renewal. That would give us time to assess if the collaboration works for everyone. Carmen considered the proposal. A temporary contract seemed more manageable and less threatening. In that case, I think we can try, she finally replied. But with one condition. Alexander raised his eyebrows, unaccustomed to receiving conditions from potential employees. And what would that be? I want autonomy to implement my approach, even if I disagree with the current team at some point, Carmen stated confidently. And I'd like to be able to adapt my schedule to resume my studies, should I decide to go back to university. A slight smile appeared on Alexander's face. The young woman had courage. He had to admit it. Sounds fair, he accepted, extending his hand. Do we have a deal then? Carmen shook his hand, sealing the pact that would change both their lives more than either could imagine at that moment. We have a deal, Mr. Thorne. Alexander, please, he corrected. If we're going to work together for Danny's well-being, we can drop the formalities. In that moment, neither of them noticed they were being watched. From the slightly ajar door of the room, Maria, the housekeeper, followed the scene with a worried look. She knew Carmen's arrival would not be well received by everyone in the house, especially by Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, the family matriarch, extremely protective of her grandson and suspicious of strangers. Meanwhile, at the other end of the city, in the small apartment Carmen shared with a roommate, her phone rang persistently. It was a call that would bring to light secrets from the past she had tried to leave behind. Secrets that could jeopardize her new opportunity before it even began. On the abandoned cell phone screen, the name flashed, Dr. Hayes, St. Jude's Hospital. What do you think Mrs. Thorne will do about Carmen? And what secrets do you think Carmen is hiding? Share your predictions. Don't go anywhere. This story is just getting started. If you're captivated, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below to let us know you're following along. Small victories and lingering doubts. 2 weeks had passed since Carmen accepted the job at the Thorne Mansion. Her adjustment was gradual, with Carmen initially coming to the house 3 times a week, so as not to abruptly alter Danny's routine. The progress was small but significant. The child now recognized her when she arrived, sometimes even offering a discreet smile. Meals became less tense, and Danny began to participate in activities Carmen suggested. Like simple games and sensory exercises she adapted from her experiences with her brother. This Thursday morning, Carmen arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. She had arranged to attend the weekly meeting with Danny's multidisciplinary team to align their approaches. Robert, the driver, was already waiting for her at the gate, as had become customary. Alexander insisted on sending the car for her, arguing that it eased her logistics and ensured punctuality. Good morning, Carmen, Robert greeted with his usual kind smile. Sleep well. Not much, she confessed, getting into the car. I stayed up late studying. I decided to try the university re-enrollment process next semester. That's great, the driver replied, starting the vehicle. Mr. Alexander will be happy to know that. He values education greatly. During the drive, Carmen mentally reviewed the notes she had prepared for the meeting. She knew she would face resistance from some professionals, especially Dr. Evans, who didn't hide her discomfort with the presence of someone without full training on the team. Upon arriving at the mansion, Carmen noticed an unfamiliar car parked at the main entrance. Do we have visitors today? She asked Robert as she got out of the vehicle. Mrs. Eleanor arrived from her trip last night, he replied in a low voice, as if sharing a secret. Mr. Alexander's mother. Carmen felt a hollowness in her stomach. She had already heard about the Thorne family matriarch through comments from Maria and other employees. She knew she was a strong-willed woman who maintained control over many aspects of the family business, even after officially passing the reins to her son. Does she know about me? Carmen asked, her anxiety rising. Robert shrugged. Mr. Alexander must have mentioned it, but Mrs. Eleanor doesn't usually get very involved in matters related to Danny. At least not directly. Carmen nodded, thanked him, and headed for the side entrance she usually used. She preferred not to encounter the matriarch on her first day. She crossed the manicured gardens and entered through a discreet door that led directly to the wing, where the therapy rooms and Danny's room were located. Maria was waiting for her in the hallway with a worried expression. "Good morning, dear." The housekeeper greeted her in a low voice. "The meeting has been moved to the library. Everyone is already there, including Mrs. Eleanor." "Mr. Alexander's mother is participating?" Carmen asked, feeling her anxiety increase. "She insisted," Maria replied with a significant look. "Be prepared, Carmen. Mrs. Eleanor can be difficult." With a sigh to gather her courage, Carmen followed Maria to the library, an imposing room on the ground floor with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with well-preserved books. In the center was a large oval table where several people were seated. She recognized Dr. Evans, Dr. Rodriguez, Danny's neurologist, and two other professionals she had briefly met. At the head of the table was Alexander, and beside him an elegant woman of approximately 70 years old. Her gray hair perfectly pulled back in a bun, her posture straight, and her expression severe. Her eyes, the same color as Alexander's, scrutinized Carmen from head to toe as she entered the room. "Ah, Ms. Rodriguez, welcome," Alexander said, standing up, punctual as always. "Allow me to introduce my mother, Eleanor Thorne." Carmen approached and extended her hand, striving to maintain her composure. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thorne," she said with a polite smile. Eleanor accepted the greeting with a brief, cold handshake. "So this is the young woman who has caused so much commotion," she commented, her tone leaving it ambiguous whether that was good or bad. "My son talks a lot about your innovative techniques." The way she pronounced innovative made her skepticism clear. "I just share what I learned with my own brother, madam," Carmen replied with humility. "Nothing that replaces the work of the qualified professionals present here." Alexander gestured to an empty chair. "Please, Carmen, join us. We were just discussing Danny's progress over the past few weeks." Carmen sat down, feeling the evaluative gazes of everyone in the room. Dr. Evans skimmed a folder with notes, while Dr. Rodriguez consulted something on his tablet. "As I was saying," Alexander continued, "I have observed significant improvements, especially in Danny's feeding and his willingness to engage in new activities. I believe Ms. Rodriguez's approach has been a valuable complement to the treatment." "With all due respect, Mr. Thorne," Dr. Evans interjected, "we must be cautious in attributing progress to unstructured interventions. Children with autism spectrum disorder often exhibit natural variations in their behaviors." "I agree that we must be scientific in our evaluations," Dr. Rodriguez said, "but we also cannot ignore positive results, even if they come from less conventional approaches." Eleanor watched the debate with keen eyes, evaluating every word. "What I'm interested in knowing," she finally said, directing her penetrating gaze towards Carmen, "is what exactly your qualification is to treat a child with needs as complex as my grandson's." The room fell silent. Everyone seemed to eagerly await the answer. A matriarch's scrutiny and a revelation. "Mrs. Thorne, I don't claim to treat Danny," Carmen replied calmly. "My role is to create a conducive environment for him to feel safe and understood, facilitating the specialist's work." "And where did you learn to do that?" Eleanor insisted. "Surely not in the restaurant where you served tables." The condescending tone made Carmen's face flush, but she maintained her composure. "I completed 3 years of psychology at New York University before I had to pause my studies," she explained. "During that time, I focused on studies of child neurodevelopment, particularly autism, because of my brother. And yes, I also learned a lot in practice, both with him and with other cases I accompanied during my volunteer work." Alexander intervened, noticing the growing discomfort. "Mother, I hired Carmen precisely because she demonstrated a natural ability that complements the team's technical work," he explained. "The results speak for themselves." "Results that could be coincidence," Eleanor retorted, "or the result of the continuous work these professionals have done for years." "If you'll allow me, Mrs. Thorne," Dr. Rodriguez spoke, "while it's too early for definitive conclusions, I have noticed changes in Danny's behavior that coincide with Ms. Rodriguez's arrival. He's more receptive during our sessions, able to maintain attention for longer, and has even shown interest in activities he previously rejected completely. Eleanor didn't seem convinced but leaned back in her chair, observing Carmen intensely. "Well, we'll see how long that miracle lasts," she commented at the end. "I've seen many revolutionary methods come and go without leaving a lasting impact." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot as we're starting out. Now let's continue. The meeting continued for another hour, with each specialist presenting their reports and suggestions. Carmen contributed modestly, always respectful of the professional's expertise, but firm in her observations about Danny's preferences and behavioral patterns she had identified. When the session ended, everyone left except Alexander, Eleanor, and Carmen. "Ms. Rodriguez, would you give us a moment?" Eleanor asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I want to speak with my son in private." "Of course, madam," Carmen replied, standing up. "Excuse me." She left the library, closing the door softly behind her. Although she knew she shouldn't, she lingered close enough to hear the agitated voices that soon emerged from the room. "Have you lost your mind, Alexander?" Eleanor's voice was sharp, even in a low tone. "Hiring a waitress with no qualifications to care for Danny? What will people think?" "I don't care what people think, mother," Alexander replied firmly. "I care about my son's well-being, and for the first time in years, I see real progress." "Progress?" Eleanor questioned. "Or are you seeing what you want to see because this pretty young woman has piqued your interest?" Carmen felt her face burn. She hadn't expected that kind of insinuation. "Don't be ridiculous." Alexander's voice sounded irritated. "This is strictly professional. Carmen has a natural gift for connecting with Danny, something none of the expensive specialists you champion have achieved." "You barely know her, Alexander," Eleanor exclaimed. "Did you check her background? Do you know why she really left university? Have you even considered that maybe she's just interested in your money?" "Enough, mother." Alexander's tone was definitive. "I did all the necessary background checks before hiring her. And contrary to what you think, she even tried to refuse the salary I initially offered, saying it was excessive." Carmen moved away from the door, feeling guilty for listening to the private conversation and disturbed by what she had heard. She was walking down the hallway when Maria appeared, carrying a tray with juice and cookies. "Ah, dear, I was looking for you," the housekeeper said. "I thought you'd like a refreshment after the meeting. Danny is in the garden with Daniela, the nanny. Perhaps you'd like to join them." "Thank you, Maria," Carmen replied with gratitude, both for the refreshment and the timely distraction. A rare connection and a mother's intrusions. Following the housekeeper's suggestion, Carmen headed to the back garden, a spacious and well-planned area with various activity zones adapted for Danny. She found the child sitting on a bench under a leafy tree, flipping through a picture book while Daniela, a young woman of about 20, sat nearby. "Good morning, Daniela," Carmen greeted. "How is Danny today?" "He's very calm," the nanny replied with a smile. "He woke up early, but he hasn't had any meltdowns so far." Carmen approached slowly and sat on the other end of the bench, respecting Danny's personal space. "Hello, Danny," she said softly. "What an interesting book you're looking at." The child didn't respond verbally but tilted the book slightly towards her, a gesture that, for him, represented an enormous social openness. "They're dinosaurs," Carmen commented with controlled enthusiasm. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Danny nodded almost imperceptibly, turning the page to show a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Daniela watched the interaction with obvious admiration. "It's incredible how he responds to you," she commented in a low voice. "He usually completely ignores new people for weeks." "I think it's because I don't force the interaction," Carmen explained, as she continued to comment on the images Danny showed. "I respect his time and his space." They spent almost half an hour like this, with Danny gradually moving closer, until he was practically leaning against Carmen's arm. Something Daniela mentioned she had never seen before. It was at that moment that Alexander appeared in the garden, still looking tense after the argument with his mother. seeing his son so comfortable in Carmen's presence. However, his expression softened. "Looks like you're having fun," he commented, approaching slowly so as not to disturb Danny. The child briefly looked at his father but soon returned his attention to the book. "Danny is showing me his favorite dinosaurs," Carmen explained with a smile. "He knows a lot about them." Alexander sat in a nearby chair, observing the interaction with interest. "He received this book for his 4th birthday from his mother," he said in a low voice. "But he rarely allowed anyone to see him with it." Carmen perceived the contained emotion in Alexander's voice. "It's an honor, then," she simply replied. Daniela discreetly moved away, giving the three of them privacy. For a few minutes, they remained in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the moment of calm and connection. "I apologize for my mother's behavior in the meeting," Alexander finally said, in a low tone so as not to distract Danny. "She's extremely protective and distrustful by nature." "You don't have to apologize," Carmen replied. "It's understandable that she worries about her grandson. Still, the way she referred to you was inappropriate." Carmen hesitated, wondering if she should reveal that she had overheard part of the private conversation. She decided it would be better to be honest. "I must confess that I overheard a bit of your conversation," she admitted, feeling embarrassed. "It wasn't intentional. I was already walking away." "But," Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm sorry you heard that," he said. "My mother has strong opinions and doesn't always filter them." "She's right to be cautious," Carmen acknowledged. "In her place, I would also question hiring someone without formal credentials for such an important position." Alexander looked at her directly, his eyes conveying determination. "You have something more important than diplomas, Carmen. You have a genuine connection with my son," he said with conviction. "And that, for me, is worth more than any academic degree." A troubling call and a secret revealed. Before Carmen could respond, her cell phone vibrated. She took it out of her pocket, and her expression changed as she saw the name on the screen. "Dr. Phillips, St. Jude's Hospital. I need to take this if you'll excuse me," she said, standing up quickly and moving a few steps away. Alexander watched with curiosity the sudden change in her demeanor. From a distance, he could see that the conversation seemed serious, with Carmen occasionally running a hand over her face as a sign of concern. When she returned, minutes later, her expression was a mask of forced calm. "Is everything all right?" Alexander asked, genuinely concerned. "Yes, just a personal matter I need to resolve," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Mr. Thorne, would it be possible for me to leave a little earlier today? I promise to make up the time another day." "Of course, no problem," he accepted immediately. "Robert can take you wherever you need to go." "No, thank you," Carmen declined. "I prefer to go on my own." Alexander noticed something was wrong but respected her privacy. "As you prefer. Danny will have a session with his speech therapist this afternoon anyway." Carmen said goodbye to Danny, promising to return the next day. And the child, surprisingly, responded with a small but significant farewell gesture. Leaving the mansion, Carmen tried to sort her thoughts. The call from Dr. Phillips brought news she feared. Her brother, Michael, had suffered a relapse and was hospitalized again. The medications that stabilized his seizures were scarce in the public health system, and the alternatives were not as effective. The doctor called because he knew Carmen always found a way to get the medications, even when they weren't available. The problem was that these drugs were expensive, much more than she could pay with her previous salary. Even with the significant raise she received working for the Thorns, her first paycheck wouldn't arrive until the end of the month. And there was the issue of her previous debt with the hospital, which she had been paying in small monthly installments. As she walked to the bus stop, Carmen considered her options. She could ask Alexander for an advance, but that would mean revealing her personal situation, something she preferred to keep separate from her professional life. Besides, after Eleanor's doubts about her intentions, asking for money would only reinforce the matriarch's suspicions. Another option would be to turn to Ryan, her ex-boyfriend, who had offered her financial help when they broke up, driven by guilt for having cheated on her. But Carmen had rejected him at the time, determined to solve her problems alone, and she didn't want to create a dependency now. The third alternative was the one that frightened her most, accepting the proposal Dr. Phillips mentioned in the call. A private clinical study was recruiting participants to test a new medication for conditions similar to Michael's. The compensation was generous, enough to cover medications for several months. But it would mean subjecting her brother to an experimental treatment, something that made her extremely nervous. As the bus approached, Carmen made a temporary decision. She would use her savings to buy the most urgent medications and buy time to find a more permanent solution. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best she could do at the moment. What she didn't know was that her hurried departure and the mysterious call had piqued Eleanor Thorne's curiosity. The matriarch, who had observed the entire scene from the library window, had already instructed her personal assistant to find out more about Dr. Phillips and St. Jude's Hospital, and especially what connection Carmen had to them. This is a critical moment for Carmen. What do you think she should do about her brother's treatment? And how will Eleanor Thorne's investigations impact everything? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. A father's concern and a sister's burden. In the following weeks, Carmen established a more regular routine at the Thorne mansion. She now spent 4 days a week with Danny, alternating between structured activities with the therapeutic team and freer moments where she implemented her own communication and socialization techniques. The child's progress was evident. He had started using more single words, maintained eye contact for longer periods, and showed less anxiety during activity transitions. One of the biggest challenges for children with autism. Alexander observed these changes with a mix of joy and admiration for Carmen's work. The two developed a professional dynamic based on mutual respect and the common goal of helping Danny. Occasionally, they dined together after the day's activities, discussing progress and challenges while the child slept. It was during one of these dinners that Alexander finally decided to ask about the matter that had been affecting Carmen, despite her efforts to hide it. "Carmen, I hope I'm not being intrusive, but I've noticed you seem preoccupied lately," he commented as Maria served dinner in the mansion's informal dining room. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Carmen hesitated, pushing her food around without really eating. She was exhausted, splitting her time between work at the mansion, visits to the hospital to see Michael, and nights studying for her university re-enrollment process. "I'm fine, just a little tired," she replied, trying to sound convincing. Alexander looked at her for a moment, his eyes reflecting genuine concern. "You receive calls that visibly upset you. Sometimes you leave in a hurry, and I've noticed you've lost weight," he said directly. "I don't want to pry into your personal life, but if there's something affecting your well-being, I'd like to know if I can help." Carmen sighed, putting down her fork. Perhaps it was time to be honest. "It's my brother, Michael," she finally admitted. "He had a relapse and has been hospitalized for a few weeks. Besides autism, he has seizure episodes that require controlled medication." "I'm very sorry to hear that," Alexander said sincerely. "Is he the same brother you mentioned when you talked about your techniques with Danny?" "Yes, the same," Carmen confirmed. "Michael is 17 now. After our grandmother passed, he was cared for by an aunt upstate, but he was recently moved to New York City for more specialized treatment." "And are you having difficulties with the treatment costs?" Alexander asked gently. Carmen felt her face flush. She didn't want to appear as if she was using her brother's situation to gain financial advantage. "I'm managing the situation," she replied, trying to close the topic. "When I receive my first paycheck, things will be easier." Alexander nodded, respecting her reservation. After a few moments of silence, he spoke again. "Carmen, I'd like to make you a proposal," he said carefully. "Not as your employer, but as someone who understands what it's like to do anything for the well-being of those we love." She looked at him cautiously. "What kind of proposal?" "The Thorne Group has a foundation that, among other initiatives, supports medical treatments not fully covered by the public system," he explained. "I'd like to offer to include your brother in the program." Carmen felt a lump in her throat. The offer was tempting, but her pride and the fear of creating emotional debts made her hesitate. "That's very generous of you, but I can't accept," she replied. "I already receive a fair salary for my work here. It wouldn't be right to receive more benefits." Alexander leaned slightly forward, his eyes conveying intensity. "It's not charity, Carmen. It's recognition," he said firmly. "What you did for Danny is priceless. For the first time in years, my son is progressing, connecting, living beyond the limitations the doctors predicted." He paused before continuing. "Besides, the foundation already exists and helps dozens of families every year. It wouldn't be a special favor, just the inclusion of one more case in the program." Carmen bit her lower lip, pensive. Michael's health was at stake, and the right treatment could make a difference in his development. "May I think about it?" she asked at the end. "Of course," Alexander accepted. "I just ask that you don't take too long. From what I understand, your brother needs help now." At that moment, Maria entered the room, looking slightly disturbed. "Excuse the interruption, Mr. Alexander, but Mrs. Eleanor just arrived and is asking for you," she informed, casting a worried glance at Carmen. Alexander frowned, surprised. "My mother? She didn't mention she was coming today," he commented, standing up. "Please ask her to wait for me in the study. I'll be there in a few minutes." When Maria left, Alexander turned to Carmen. "I want you to seriously consider my proposal. Not for me or out of gratitude, but for your brother." Carmen nodded, though still unsure. "Thank you for understanding, Alexander. I think I should leave now. It's getting late." "You don't have to leave because my mother arrived," he said, noticing her agitation. "It's okay, really," Carmen assured. "I have to stop by the hospital before going home." Alexander didn't insist, understanding that she preferred to avoid an awkward encounter with Eleanor. "Robert can take you," he offered. This time, Carmen accepted, grateful for the possibility of getting to the hospital earlier. While waiting for the driver at the mansion entrance, Carmen didn't notice she was being watched by Eleanor, who studied her from the study window with calculating eyes. The matriarch had received a detailed report on Carmen Rodriguez that afternoon, including her financial difficulties related to her brother's treatment and a considerable debt to St. Jude's Hospital. In Eleanor's mind, that information was exactly what she needed to confirm her suspicions. That young waitress was only approaching her son and grandson for financial gain, and she would do everything possible to protect her family from what she considered another blow of fate. What would you do if you were Carmen? Facing a generous offer from Alexander but knowing his mother suspects your motives. Would you accept the help? Let us know in the comments. A mother's confrontation and a shocking revelation. The next day, Carmen arrived at the mansion at her usual time, ready for a morning of activities with Danny. To her surprise, she found not only the child in the therapy room, but also Eleanor, sitting in an armchair in the corner, observing them intently. "Good morning, Danny," Carmen greeted with her usual warm smile, though she felt uncomfortable by the unexpected presence. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne." "Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez," Eleanor replied dryly. "I hope my presence doesn't bother you. I'm curious to observe these revolutionary techniques that have so impressed my son." Carmen remained calm, focusing first on Danny. "Of course, it doesn't bother me," she replied politely. "Danny, look what I brought for us today." She opened her bag and took out a small set of cards with images and words, a material she had developed specifically to help children with verbal difficulties communicate. For almost an hour, Carmen worked with Danny, using the cards, encouraging him to form simple sequences that represented his preferences and needs. The child was engaged and, to Eleanor's surprise, managed to follow complex instructions and even correct small errors that Carmen deliberately introduced as part of the exercise. "Very good, Danny," Carmen praised when he completed a particularly challenging sequence. "You're getting very good at this." Danny didn't smile openly, but his eyes sparkled with satisfaction. When the session ended and the child was taken by Daniela for his snack, Eleanor remained in the room, her gaze fixed on Carmen. "I must admit you have an interesting method, Ms. Rodriguez," she commented unenthusiastically. Where exactly did you learn these very specific techniques? I developed most of them trying to communicate with my brother, Carmen explained, putting away the material. Then I refined them based on academic research and guidance from the professionals who attended to him. Your autistic brother who is hospitalized at St. Jude's, correct? Eleanor asked casually. Carmen froze for an instant, surprised that the matriarch knew that detail. Yes, Michael is temporarily hospitalized there, she confirmed, trying to keep her voice neutral. How did you know that? Eleanor smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. All matters affecting my grandson's well-being interest me, she replied vaguely, including the people who enter his life. Rising elegantly, the matriarch adjusted her impeccable coat before continuing. Ms. Rodriguez, let's be direct, shall we? I know you face serious financial difficulties related to your brother's treatment. I also know that this led you to accumulate a considerable debt with the hospital. Carmen felt her blood run cold. How had this woman discovered so many details of her private life? With all due respect, Mrs. Thorne, my personal financial situation has no bearing on my work here, she replied, struggling to maintain her composure. On the contrary, my dear, Eleanor retorted with false sweetness. It has everything to do with it, especially when my son, always generous and sometimes too naive, offers to include your brother in our family foundations program. A rather substantial benefit, I must say. Carmen felt a wave of indignation. I didn't ask for that, she stated firmly. In fact, I told Alexander the first needed to think about it, as I don't feel comfortable accepting. A clever answer. Hesitating before accepting is part of the game, isn't it? Eleanor commented, her words dripping with venom. But let's get straight to the point. I have an alternative proposal for you. The matriarch opened her designer bag and took out an envelope. Here's a check for enough to cover all your debts with the hospital and guarantee a year of first-rate treatment for your brother, she explained, extending the envelope. It's yours, with no obligation to the foundation, with only one condition. That you immediately distance yourself from Danny and Alexander. Carmen looked at the envelope as if it were toxic. She felt her blood pounding in her temples. Are you offering me money to disappear? She asked incredulously. I'm offering you a dignified exit, Eleanor corrected. You get what you really came for without needing to continue this charade of special dedication to my grandson. Carmen took a step back, as if she had been physically struck. You understand nothing about me or about what I do here, she said, her voice slightly trembling. I genuinely care about Danny. His progress is not a trick or a charade. Perhaps you even believe that, Eleanor conceded. But deep down we know that your approach to this family was motivated by financial need. And I don't blame you. It's the basic human instinct for survival. She pushed the envelope towards Carmen. Think it over carefully, Ms. Rodriguez. This is a much simpler path than staying here, facing constant scrutiny and Alexander's eventual disillusionment when Danny inevitably reaches a plateau in his development. Carmen felt tears of anger burn in her eyes, but she refused to show weakness. I am not for sale, Mrs. Thorne, she said, pushing the envelope away with her hand. And your offer is deeply offensive, not only to me, but to your son and your grandson. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, unaccustomed to being contradicted. My son is a vulnerable man, Ms. Rodriguez, she said in an icy tone. Since he lost Isabel, he clings to any hope, no matter how illusory. And you, consciously or unconsciously, are taking advantage of that vulnerability. A public accusation and a painful departure. Before Carmen could respond, the room door opened, and Alexander entered, stopping abruptly as he sensed the tension in the air. What's going on here? He asked, looking from his mother to Carmen. Eleanor quickly put the envelope back in her bag. Just a chat between women, she replied with false lightness. I was getting to know Ms. Rodriguez better. Alexander didn't seem convinced. His eyes fixed on Carmen, noticing her paleness and tense posture. Carmen, are you all right? He asked directly. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to reveal what had just happened, but another feared the consequences for Danny. A family rupture could negatively affect the child's progress. "I'm fine," she finally replied. "Just a little tired today." Eleanor smiled triumphantly, interpreting the answer as a sign that Carmen would not be willing to create conflict. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on Danny's snack," Carmen said, quickly heading for the door. "Carmen, wait," Alexander called, but she didn't stop. "Ms. Rodriguez, we haven't finished our conversation." Eleanor's voice reached her as she was already in the hallway. Carmen turned briefly. "Yes, we have, Mrs. Thorne," she said with a dignity she didn't know she still possessed. "You have my resignation letter. I will not work where my character is constantly questioned, no matter how much I need the money." And with that, she left, leaving behind a heavy silence interrupted only by Eleanor's satisfied sigh. "Well, that was easier than I expected," the matriarch commented, settling comfortably into the chair Carmen had just vacated. Alexander looked at his mother with a fury he rarely showed. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You've just driven away the only person who's made a real connection with Danny in years. I protected you and my grandson from an opportunist, Alexander," Eleanor replied unperturbed. "One day you'll thank me." Alexander shook his head, incredulous. "Mr. Harrison, please leave us alone," he asked the investigator, who quickly withdrew, clearly relieved to escape the family confrontation. When they were alone, Alexander looked directly at his mother. "What you did is unforgivable," he said coldly. "Not only did you invade an employee's privacy unethically and possibly illegally, but you distorted facts to serve your narrative." "What facts did I distort?" Eleanor challenged. "She really withdrew the accusation and received money. She really has significant debts. She really considered subjecting her brother to experimental treatment for money. Those are facts, Alexander." "Facts without context are just weapons, Mother," he retorted. "And you just used those weapons to hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Standing up, Alexander walked to the window, observing the garden where, at some point that day, he would have to explain to Danny why Carmen wouldn't be coming back. The thought tore him apart. "You'll thank me when this is just a memory," Eleanor insisted, collecting the documents scattered on the table. "We'll find more qualified and suitable professionals to help Danny." Alexander turned slowly, a cold determination in his gaze. "No, Mother," he said firmly. "This time you've gone too far. You will never again interfere with the decisions I make about my son." Eleanor raised her eyebrows, surprised by his tone. "What do you mean?" "I'm saying that, as of today, you are out of any decision related to Danny," Alexander declared. "And if you insist on interfering, I will also reconsider your position in the family business." Eleanor paled. Never before had her son confronted her in such a way. "You can't be serious," she murmured. "All I did was protect you." "No, Mother, all you did was control our lives as always," Alexander corrected. "And now, please leave me alone. I have a situation to remedy, if it's still possible." Eleanor stood up, adjusting her coat with wounded dignity. "You're making a mistake, Alexander," she said, heading for the door. "I sincerely hope Danny isn't the one who pays for your naivety." When the door closed behind the matriarch, Alexander sank into his chair. A sense of overwhelming defeat enveloped him. The damage was done. Carmen was gone, humiliated and hurt, and he feared the impact on Danny would be devastating. Picking up the phone, he quickly dialed. "Robert, I need you to find Carmen Rodriguez immediately," he instructed the driver. "She left the mansion a few minutes ago. Find out where she went and inform me as soon as you know." A brother's crisis and a desperate decision. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Carmen walked aimlessly through the streets, silent tears streaming down her face. She had left the mansion so distraught that she hadn't even thought about how she would get home. Her cell phone rang incessantly in her bag, probably Alexander trying to contact her, but she didn't have the strength to answer. Finally, she sat on a park bench and took a deep breath, trying to sort her thoughts. She would have to find another job quickly. Michael's situation was a priority. There was no time to wallow. When she finally checked her phone, she saw that the missed calls were not from Alexander, but from Dr. Phillips. With a pounding heart, she answered immediately. "Dr. Phillips, it's Carmen." "What happened?" she asked, fearing bad news. "Carmen, I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible," the doctor replied in a grave voice. "Michael had a severe seizure this morning. We've stabilized him, but we need to make important decisions about the next step of his treatment." "I'm on my way," she replied, standing up and frantically waving down a passing taxi. As the vehicle navigated the chaotic New York City traffic, Carmen tried to process everything that had happened. In a matter of hours, she had lost a job she loved, and now she faced a new crisis in Michael's health. It seemed the universe was conspiring against her. At the hospital, she found Dr. Phillips in the ICU waiting room, his serious expression increasing Carmen's anxiety. "How is he?" she asked as soon as she approached. "Stable for now, but concerning," the doctor replied, leading her to a private room. "Carmen, the seizures are increasing in frequency and intensity. The current treatment is no longer effective." Carmen sat down, her legs suddenly weak. "What are our options?" The doctor sighed, adjusting his glasses. "There's a new medication that might help, but it's extremely expensive and not covered by the system," he explained. "The other alternative is the surgery we discussed before." "Surgery?" Carmen repeated, feeling her mouth go dry. "But you said that would be only a last resort." "And it still is," Dr. Phillips confirmed with a heavy sigh. "But we're quickly reaching that point. Carmen, conventional medications are no longer controlling the seizures as before, and this new pattern of seizures is particularly worrying." Carmen ran her hands over her face, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation. "How much would that new medication cost?" The doctor wrote a figure on a paper and slid it across the table. Carmen felt her stomach drop as she saw the numbers. "It's impossible," she murmured, discouraged. "Even in a full year of work, I couldn't save that amount." "And what about the surgery?" she asked after a moment of reflection. "What are the risks?" "Like any brain procedure, there are significant risks," Dr. Phillips explained cautiously. "But Michael is young and generally healthy, which increases the chances of success. Dr. Roberts' team, who would perform the operation, is one of the best in the country. And the costs? Still high, but considerably less than long-term medication treatment," the doctor replied. "Also, there's a possibility of including him in a hospital assistance program for special cases." Carmen nodded slowly, trying to process all the information. "Can I see him now?" "Of course," Dr. Phillips replied, standing up. "He's sedated but stable. Just a few minutes, please." A promise made and a glimmer of hope. In the ICU, Carmen approached the bed where Michael lay, looking even smaller and more fragile connected to various monitors. His face, so similar to hers, was pale and peaceful under the effects of the sedation. "Hi, little brother," she whispered, taking his hand carefully so as not to disturb the 4-axis. "I'm here with you. Everything's going to be all right, I promise." The tears she had held back all morning finally released, sliding silently down her face. At that moment, all the humiliation and pain she had felt at the Thorne mansion seemed insignificant compared to the fear of losing her brother. "We'll find a way," she promised, gently squeezing his hand. "We always do, right?" After a few minutes, a nurse gently approached, indicating that her time was up. Carmen kissed her brother's forehead and left the room, promising to return later. In the hallway, she was surprised to find Robert, Alexander's driver, waiting patiently. "Ms. Carmen," he greeted her respectfully. "Mr. Alexander is very worried and would like to speak with you. He's waiting in the car in the parking lot." "Robert, I appreciate it, but I'm not in a state to face any more conflicts today," she replied, exhausted. "It's not a conflict, miss," the driver assured her. "Mr. Alexander is genuinely concerned and wants to help. Please, just 5 minutes." Carmen hesitated but finally agreed with a resigned sigh. She followed Robert to the parking lot, where the black Mercedes was parked with the engine running. As she approached, Alexander got out of the vehicle, his face a mask of concern. Carmen, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. His voice was laden with contrition. How is your brother? She was surprised by the genuine question. She had expected reproaches or attempts to justify what had happened at the mansion. He's not well, she replied sincerely. He had a severe seizure this morning. The doctors are considering surgery as a last option. Alexander nodded gravely. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I'm even more sorry that you're going through this difficult time after what happened today at my house. He paused, visibly uncomfortable. Carmen, I didn't know about the offer my mother made you, nor about the investigation she ordered into your personal life. It was totally inappropriate and unacceptable. That doesn't matter anymore, Alexander, Carmen replied, suddenly feeling very tired. I understand you must protect your family and your interests. I just regret that Danny will be the one to suffer most from my abrupt departure. That's precisely what I need to talk to you about, Alexander said with a more urgent tone. Danny asked for you as soon as he found out you wouldn't be in today. When I tried to explain that you wouldn't be coming anymore, he had a meltdown unlike anything we've seen in months. Carmen felt a pang in her heart. Despite all the pain, her concern for Danny's well-being remained intact. I'm so sorry for him, she said sincerely. But I can't go back, Alexander, not after what happened. I understand your position, he replied. And I'm not asking you to return under the same conditions. In fact, I have a completely different proposal. Alexander took a deep breath before continuing. I'd like to offer you a formal contract to develop your communication method for autistic children through the Thorn Foundation. You would have complete autonomy, a suitable laboratory, and you could include your brother in the program as the first beneficiary, with all medical expenses covered, including the surgery he needs. Carmen blinked, astonished by the unexpected proposal. Why? She simply asked. Why would you do this after everything that happened? For 3 reasons, Alexander replied sincerely. First, because your method works. I've seen it with my own son. Second, because it would be a way to repair the damage that was unjustly caused to you today. And third, because it's the right thing to do. He looked her directly in the eyes before adding, My mother will have no involvement in this project. It will be administered directly by me and the Foundation's executive board. Carmen felt overwhelmed by mixed emotions. The proposal was tempting and would solve her most urgent problems, especially Michael's. But the fear of becoming dependent or being in debt was still there. And what about Danny? She asked, avoiding a direct answer about the proposal. That would depend entirely on you, Alexander replied. If you feel you can continue working with him, we would be delighted. If you prefer to maintain distance from our personal family, I will also understand. Carmen considered the proposal for a long moment. I need time to think, she said at the end. And I need to understand exactly what that contract entails. I can't make a decision like this in a hospital parking lot. Alexander nodded, understanding. Fair enough, he accepted. May I ask my lawyer to prepare a draft for you to review? No commitment, just for you to evaluate it properly. Okay. Carmen accepted, still hesitant. An awkward silence followed until Alexander spoke again. There's something else, Carmen. Regardless of your decision on the Foundation's proposal, I'd like to cover your brother's immediate medical expenses. I know his situation is urgent. She began to automatically refuse, but Alexander interrupted her with a gentle gesture. Please, consider it as compensation for the emotional distress you were caused today, he asked. There are no conditions. Michael will receive the necessary care, and you won't owe me anything. Carmen felt tears burn her eyes again. She was too exhausted to keep fighting everything and everyone. Why do you care so much? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You barely know me. Alexander seemed to reflect deeply before answering. Perhaps because you remind me of Isabel in many ways, he admitted. The same unwavering determination, the same unbreakable spirit, the same ability to see beyond appearances. He paused before adding, or perhaps because in a world where people like my mother always assume the worst of others, I prefer to believe that there are still genuinely good people. Carmen had no answer for that. After a few moments of silence, she nodded slightly. I accept your help for Michael, she finally said. But I need it to be done discreetly. I don't want my brother to become a charity project or an advertisement. You have my word, Alexander assured. Everything will be handled with the utmost respect and privacy. As they said goodbye, Carmen felt a weight lift from her shoulders, along with the strange feeling that, despite everything, what had happened on that terrible day, perhaps there was a less dark path ahead than she imagined. What she didn't know was that at the Thorne mansion, Danny remained inconsolable, refusing to eat or participate in any activity, and that Eleanor watched the situation with growing concern, beginning to question whether her interference had truly been for the good of the family or just a manifestation of her own desire for control. What do you think of Alexander's bold proposal? Do you believe Eleanor Thorne will truly change her mind? Share your thoughts below. A mother's regret and a new chapter for Michael. 2 weeks had passed since that turbulent day. Michael had undergone successful surgery and was now recovering, surrounded by an excellent medical team discreetly hired by Alexander. The operation, considered high risk, had proceeded without complications, and the initial results were promising. Carmen divided her time between the hospital and meetings with the Thorne Foundation's legal team, finalizing the details of the contract for the development of her therapeutic method. The proposal had evolved into something even broader, the creation of a specialized center that would serve children from low-income families, using personalized techniques based on Carmen's experience. That Thursday afternoon, she met Alexander at the Foundation's office, away from the mansion and potential interference from Eleanor. The lawyers assured me that all your requirements were incorporated into the contract, Alexander said, handing her a folder with the final documents. Total autonomy over the methodology, a team selected by you, and freedom to complete your studies in parallel. Carmen carefully reviewed the papers. Everything seemed to be in order exactly as they had discussed. It's an ambitious project, she commented, impressed by the scale and resources allocated. Are you sure the Foundation's board of directors will approve something so personalized? Alexander smiled faintly. The board already approved it unanimously, he replied. Your preliminary results with Danny were convincing enough, even for the most skeptical. At the mention of his son, his expression darkened. How is he? Carmen asked, noticing the change. Alexander sighed deeply. Not very well, he admitted. He refuses to fully participate in therapies, has had setbacks in some newly acquired skills, and his anxiety attacks have returned. Carmen felt a pang of guilt, though she knew she wasn't responsible for the situation. I'm so sorry, she said sincerely. Perhaps with time. He asks for you every day, Alexander interrupted softly. In his own way, of course. He shows the dinosaur book you used to read together and points to where you used to sit. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Carmen gathered the courage to ask the question she had avoided for 2 weeks. And your mother? How did she react to all this? Alexander shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. Eleanor is reconsidering some of her positions, he replied diplomatically. Seeing her so thoroughly wrong about you and witnessing the negative impact on Danny made her question her own convictions. He hesitated before continuing. In fact, she asked to speak with you in person. Carmen raised her eyebrows, surprised. Speak with me? Why? I'm not sure, Alexander admitted. She didn't reveal her intentions, only said she would like a private conversation. I made it clear that it would be entirely your decision to accept or refuse. Carmen considered it for a moment. Part of her wanted to avoid Eleanor completely, fearing more manipulation or hostility. But another part, the same one that connected with Danny when others failed, was curious about what might motivate that unexpected request. Okay, she finally agreed. I can see her, but I prefer it to be on neutral ground, perhaps at the coffee shop near the Foundation. I'll let her know, Alexander replied, seeming relieved. As they finalized the contract details, Carmen couldn't stop thinking about what Eleanor might want. Would she be genuinely remorseful, or planning some new strategy to drive her away. Whatever the motive, Carmen was determined not to let the matriarch intimidate her again. A matriarch's apology and a surprising alliance. The next day, precisely at 10 a.m., Carmen entered the Sunlight Cafe, an elegant but discreet establishment in the city's financial center. Eleanor was already there, seated at a table in the back, away from windows and curious ears. Even in a casual setting, the matriarch maintained her impeccable posture and refined appearance. Carmen, however, noticed something different in her eyes, a vulnerability that wasn't present in their previous encounters. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne," Carmen greeted formally, sitting opposite her. "Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez," Eleanor replied, her tone less authoritative than usual. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me, considering our past interactions." A waiter approached, and both ordered coffee, creating a momentary pause in the still tense conversation. When he left, Eleanor got straight to the point. "Ms. Rodriguez, Carmen, I requested this meeting today to do something I rarely do," she began, the words seemingly difficult to utter. "I want to apologize for how I treated you and for the unfair assumptions I made about your character and intentions." Carmen couldn't hide her surprise. Of all the possibilities she imagined, a sincere apology was the last she expected. "I confess I'm surprised," she replied honestly. "Understandable," Eleanor agreed with a faint, humorless smile. "I'm not known for admitting mistakes easily. My late husband used to say I die before acknowledging an error." The waiter returned with the coffees, providing another moment of pause. When they were alone again, Eleanor continued. "I spent decades protecting my family and the businesses we built. In the process, I developed an almost automatic distrust towards anyone who approached us, especially after Alexander became a widower and Danny received his diagnosis." She took a sip of coffee before proceeding. "When you appeared and managed an immediate connection with my grandson, something renowned specialists hadn't achieved, my protective instinct activated all alarms. It was too convenient, too perfect to be genuine." "I understand your caution," Carmen replied, maintaining her guard. "But investigating my private life and distorting facts to defame me went beyond caution." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You are absolutely right. I overstepped all ethical and moral boundaries, convinced that the end justified the means," she admitted. "I only realized my mistake when I saw the devastating impact your absence caused Danny." The mention of the child slightly softened Carmen's expression. "How is he really?" she asked with genuine concern in her voice. "Not well," Eleanor replied sadly. "He has regressed a lot. He has become isolated again. He refuses to eat properly and has had some of the worst meltdowns in years." The matriarch hesitated, as if measuring her next words. "Last night I had a revelation while watching him struggle to sleep. I realized that, in my obstinacy to protect him, I ended up causing him real and unnecessary suffering by driving away someone who genuinely helped him." Carmen listened intently, still cautious, but beginning to believe in the sincerity of Eleanor's repentance. "Mrs. Thorne, I appreciate your apologies, but I need to understand, what exactly do you expect from this meeting?" she asked directly. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Two things, actually," she replied. "First, I want you to know that I fully support the Therapeutic Center project with the Foundation. Not only do I support it, but I intend to contribute personally, without interfering with your autonomy, of course." "And the second?" Carmen inquired, sensing what was coming. "I would like to ask you, not as the Thorne matriarch or a Foundation investor, but as a desperate grandmother, to consider resuming your personal work with Danny," Eleanor said, her voice showing vulnerability for the first time. "He needs you, Carmen, more than any of us imagined." Carmen felt a whirlwind of emotions. The sincerity in Eleanor's request was palpable, as was her genuine concern for her grandson. Still, returning to the mansion, facing the memories of the humiliation she had suffered, wouldn't be easy. "I must be honest, Mrs. Thorne," she finally replied. "I also miss Danny and worry about him. But to go back as if nothing happened, I don't know if I can." "I understand completely," Eleanor said, nodding. And I wouldn't expect that. In fact, I have another proposal. The matriarch took another sip of coffee before continuing. The annex house on the main property, where Isabel had her architecture studio, has been vacant for years. Alexander mentioned the possibility of adapting it as a therapeutic space for Danny, separate from the main house. You could work with him there, without needing to interact with the rest of the house or with me if you prefer. The proposal was tempting and resolved many of the obstacles Carmen had imagined. I would need to think about it, she replied cautiously, and speak with Alexander to understand how it would fit into the larger therapeutic center project. Naturally, Eleanor accepted immediately. Take all the time you need. I just ask you to seriously consider it, for Danny. At the end of the meeting, as they said goodbye, Eleanor did something completely unexpected. She extended her hand for a formal handshake, but when Carmen returned the gesture, the matriarch held it for a moment longer than necessary. You remind me so much of Isabel, you know? She commented softly. The same unbreakable determination, the same refusal to bend to power or money. I think that's why Danny connected with you so quickly. And perhaps that's also why I reacted so defensively. Carmen didn't know how to respond to that surprising confession. She just nodded in acknowledgement before leaving. In the taxi, heading to the hospital to visit Michael, she reflected on the unexpected encounter. Eleanor Thorne, the powerful matriarch who had tried to buy her off and then destroy her, was now asking for her help and extending an olive branch. The world, without a doubt, was a strange and unpredictable place. And somewhere in the back of her mind, an idea began to form. An idea that could tie together all the loose ends of her fragmented life. Michael, her interrupted dream of working with special needs children, and little Danny, who had unexpectedly touched her heart. A custom-built haven and a tender reunion. A week later, Carmen stood in front of the annex house mentioned by Eleanor, marveling at the transformations that had been made in record time. What was once an elegant but conventional studio had now been adapted as a state-of-the-art therapeutic space, with sensory areas, activity rooms, and specialized equipment. Alexander walked beside her, explaining the adaptations made based on the preliminary suggestions she had provided. We managed to implement practically everything you recommended, he said with obvious satisfaction. The team of architects worked day and night to finish on time. Carmen walked through the rooms, noticing the careful details. Adjustable lighting for children with visual sensitivity, acoustic materials to reduce ambient noise, and a variety of textures and tactile stimuli strategically placed. It's impressive, she commented sincerely. I never imagined seeing my ideas implemented on such a comprehensive scale. This is just the beginning, Alexander replied. The main center that will serve more children will be even larger. But we wanted to start here as a pilot project, with Danny as the first beneficiary. At the mention of his son, his expression became more serious. He's been gradually improving since he found out you'd be returning, he explained. But he's still unsure, as if he fears another disappointment. Carmen nodded, understanding perfectly. It's better to go slowly, she suggested. Maybe start with short visits so he gets used to my presence again, without creating too many expectations. I completely agree, Alexander said. In fact, he's with Maria in the garden now. If you feel ready, we could casually pass by as a first contact. Carmen took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I'm ready, she affirmed with determination. They walked along the stone path connecting the annex house to the main property, passing through meticulously kept gardens. From a distance, Carmen saw Danny sitting on a bench under a leafy tree, flipping through a book while Maria discreetly supervised. When they approached, Maria noticed them first and smiled, greeting them discreetly. Danny remained engrossed in his book, seemingly unaware of the approaching people. Hello, Danny, Alexander greeted softly. Look who came to visit the annex house today. The child slowly looked up, and recognizing Carmen, his expression changed. He didn't smile openly, but his eyes lit up in a way that everyone present could notice. Hello, Danny, Carmen said, keeping her voice calm and familiar. It's good to see you again. Is that the dinosaur book we're looking at? To everyone's surprise, especially Alexander's, Danny extended the book towards Carmen, an explicit invitation for her to join him. It was a small gesture for most children, but for Danny, it represented a huge communicative breakthrough. Carmen sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, and began commenting on the book's images, exactly as they used to do. Little by little, Danny moved closer until they were practically shoulder to shoulder, absorbed in their own world of silent communication and mutual understanding. Alexander watched the scene with a lump in his throat, moved to see his son reconnect so naturally with Carmen. Maria discreetly moved away, giving them space, and he did the same, not wanting to interrupt that precious moment of reunion. From the second-floor window of the main house, Eleanor also watched the scene with a complex expression on her face. There was regret for the unnecessary suffering she had caused, but also a renewed hope as she saw her grandson show such emotional openness. A new routine, a bold invitation. Within a week, the routine had been reestablished. Carmen divided her time between the annex house, where she worked with Danny in structured sessions, and the hospital, where Michael continued his recovery with constant progress. The therapeutic center project advanced rapidly, with Carmen actively participating in the planning and selection of the initial team. One particularly productive afternoon, as they finished a session with surprising results, Alexander entered the annex house with an animated expression. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, watching Danny organize a complex sequence of blocks, following Carmen's instructions. "But I have news that couldn't wait." Carmen smiled, noticing his enthusiasm. "Any problems?" she asked, as she helped Danny put away the materials. "On the contrary," Alexander replied. "I just received a call from Dr. Phillips. Michael had the latest results from his studies, and they are extremely positive. So positive, in fact, that he could be discharged next week, provided he has adequate follow-up." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed, her voice overflowing with emotion. "But I confess I'm a little worried. My apartment is too small and it's on the 4th floor without an elevator." "As for that," Alexander interrupted kindly, "I have another proposal to discuss." He looked at Danny, who seemed oblivious to the conversation, concentrating on putting his blocks away in a specific color order. "Perhaps we can talk later when you're done with him," he suggested. Carmen nodded, curious about what Alexander had in mind. She never imagined that her life could change so drastically in a few short weeks, going from despair to renewed hope. 2 proposals, 1 future. That night, after Danny had fallen asleep, Alexander invited Carmen to dinner on the terrace of the annex house, a quiet space overlooking the illuminated gardens. Maria had prepared a light but elegant meal, served with the discretion that characterized her work. "So, what's that mysterious proposal?" Carmen asked after getting comfortable. Alexander smiled, pouring himself water before responding. "Actually, it's 2 related proposals," he began. "The first has to do with Michael. I'd like to offer you both the 2nd floor of the annex house, temporarily. There's a master bedroom and another adjacent one, which would be perfect. And the proximity would facilitate both your work with Danny and continuous medical follow-up for your brother." Carmen blinked, surprised by the generosity of the offer. "That's extremely kind, Alexander, but I don't know if it would be appropriate." "Why not?" he questioned. "The annex house is separate from the main house. You would have complete privacy, and Michael would have access to all the necessary support during his recovery." He paused before adding, "Besides, it would be temporary, just until he's sufficiently recovered and you find a more suitable place for his needs." Carmen considered the proposal. It would indeed solve several practical problems immediately. "And what would be the second part of the proposal?" she asked, sensing there was more to come. Alexander shifted in his chair, suddenly seeming less certain. "This one is a little more personal," he admitted. "I've observed the transformation in Danny since your return. It's not just about the skills he's developing, but about the emotional connection, something he rarely shows." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "Carmen, you've brought a light into his life that I haven't seen since Isabel left." And honestly, into my life too. Carmen felt her heart race, realizing the direction the conversation was taking. Alexander, please let me finish, he asked gently. I'm not proposing anything rushed or inappropriate. I would just like to explore the possibility of getting to know each other better, not as employer and employee, nor as project partners, but as two people who share similar values and purposes. He smiled shyly before adding, and who perhaps can find more in common than they initially imagined. Carmen felt the heat rise to her face. She couldn't deny that she had also felt a connection with Alexander, admiring his integrity, dedication to his son, and willingness to acknowledge mistakes and correct them. But there were so many potential complications. I don't know what to say, she admitted honestly. There are so many factors involved. Our difference in social contexts, the professional situation, Michael, Danny, your mother. I understand all those concerns, Alexander assured her. And I don't expect an immediate answer. I just ask you to keep an open mind to the possibility. He extended his hand across the table without touching hers, just offering closeness. I promise to respect any decision you make, and I guarantee it won't affect our professional agreements or the well-being of Danny and Michael. Carmen appreciated the respectful approach and the lack of pressure. Thank you for understanding the complexity of the situation, she replied. As for the first proposal about the temporary accommodation for me and Michael, I think I can accept as long as it's truly temporary and we can contribute in some way. Excellent, Alexander smiled. And as for the second, just think about it. No rush, no pressure. The dinner continued on a lighter note, with conversations about Danny's progress and the plans for the therapeutic center. When they said goodbye, there was a new dimension in the air between them. Not exactly a commitment, but a possibility that both recognized. What neither of them noticed was Eleanor's figure, who had witnessed part of the conversation while passing through the gardens. Her expression, unlike previous occasions, was not one of disapproval, but of reflective contemplation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot as we're starting out. Now let's continue. A family forms and a grandmother's blessing. 2 weeks later, Michael was discharged from the hospital and moved to the annex house, where a spacious room had been adapted to his specific needs. The move was a success, with the young man adapting quickly to the new environment and showing enthusiasm for the spacious areas and accessible garden. Carmen established a routine that balanced her work with Danny, caring for her brother, and developing the therapeutic center. Surprisingly, Danny and Michael began to interact occasionally during garden activities, establishing a silent but significant connection that benefited both of them. One Saturday afternoon, while watching the two, sitting under a leafy tree, each absorbed in their own activities, but comfortable with the other's presence, Carmen was surprised to see Eleanor approach. "It's a beautiful scene, isn't it?" the matriarch commented, stopping beside her. Two young men so different, yet they seemed to understand each other perfectly. "It's true," Carmen agreed, still getting used to this softer version of Eleanor. "Michael has always been very intuitive with other neurodivergent people. It's as if they share a language that transcends words." Eleanor nodded, observing the young men for a few more moments before turning to Carmen. "I'd like to invite you for tea tomorrow," she said, direct as ever. "Just the two of us. There are some topics I'd like to discuss, if you're willing." Carmen felt a slight unease remembering her last private encounter with Eleanor, but things had changed significantly since then. "Of course," she accepted cautiously. "What time would be convenient?" "At 3 p.m. in the tea room of the main house," Eleanor replied. "And don't worry, it has nothing to do with trying to drive you away again." With an enigmatic smile, the matriarch walked away, leaving Carmen intrigued about what was to come. The next day, promptly at 3, Carmen presented herself at the main house. Maria greeted her with a warm smile and led her to the tea room, an elegant but cozy space with large windows overlooking the garden. Eleanor was already there, personally overseeing the arrangement of the tea service on a round table.
"Ah, Carmen, welcome,"
she greeted, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Maria served the tea and discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. For a few moments, they chatted about trivial matters. The pleasant weather, Michael's progress, the development of the therapeutic center. Finally, after the second cup, Eleanor got straight to the point. Carmen, I invited you today for specific reasons, she began, gently setting down her cup. The first is to reiterate, once again, my sincere regret for my initial behavior towards you. I made serious mistakes based on prejudice and unfounded fears. I've already accepted your apologies, Mrs. Thorne, Carmen replied. There's no need to revisit the topic. Eleanor, please, the matriarch corrected. And yes, it is necessary, because my second reason is tied to the first. She opened a side drawer and took out an elegant leather portfolio. 3 days ago, I formalized important changes in the family businesses, she explained, opening it. I officially transferred my shares to Alexander, retaining only a consultative position on the board. I also restructured the governance of the Thorne Foundation, creating an independent board where Alexander will have the final say. Carmen listened attentively, not fully understanding why Eleanor was sharing this corporate information with her. That sounds significant, she commented, unsure how to respond. It's more than significant, Eleanor continued. It's a fundamental shift in the family dynamic that I've controlled for decades. And do you know what made me decide? Carmen shook her head, genuinely curious. You, Eleanor replied simply. Or rather, the impact you had on my son and my grandson. Seeing you interact with Danny, how Alexander regained the hope and purpose he lost after Isabel's passing, made me see that my time of controlling everything has passed. The matriarch took a sip of tea before continuing. For years, I convinced myself that no one could manage our family or business better than I could. I truly believed that my judgment was infallible and my interference always necessary. She smiled faintly, with an irony Carmen would never expect to see. How absurd, isn't it, to believe that one person always knows best for everyone. My husband tried to show me many times, but I was too stubborn to listen. Carmen didn't know how to react to this vulnerability, so different from the image she had of Eleanor. The third reason for our meeting, the matriarch continued, is even more personal. I've noticed that Alexander shows a special interest in you that goes beyond the professional or gratitude for what you've done for Danny. Carmen felt the heat rise to her face. Mrs. Thorne, Eleanor, Please, let me finish, Eleanor asked softly. I'm not here to question or interfere. On the contrary, I want you to know that if you and Alexander decide to explore that possibility, you will have my complete support. Carmen couldn't hide her surprise. That's a significant shift in perspective, she commented honestly. Eleanor chuckled softly. Yes, it is. And believe me, no one is more surprised than myself, she admitted. But seeing you these past few weeks has reminded me so much of Isabel. Not in appearance or personality, but in the essence of her character, in her integrity, in her capacity for unconditional love. She paused, her eyes momentarily moist. Isabel was the best thing that ever happened to my son, and losing her so soon was devastating for everyone. For years, I feared that any woman who approached him would only be interested in his fortune or position. It was a terrible mistake to assume the same of you. Eleanor extended her hand, briefly covering Carmen's in a surprisingly maternal gesture. What I mean, dear, is that you have brought light back into this house. And whatever path you and Alexander choose, professional, personal, or both, you now have an ally in me, not an adversary. Carmen felt deeply moved by the sincerity of Eleanor's words. She never would have predicted such a transformation in the matriarch. Thank you, she simply replied, more elaborate words seeming inadequate for the moment. Leaving the main house later, Carmen walked with a light step, feeling that a great obstacle had been removed from her path. Eleanor's approval wasn't necessary for her personal decisions, but it eliminated a layer of complication that, without a doubt, would have impacted any potential relationship with Alexander. As she reflected on the surprising conversation, she found Alexander in the garden, watching Danny and Michael playing in the distance, supervised by Daniela. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How was the meeting with my mother?" "Surprisingly positive," Carmen replied, still processing everything. "Your mother is a complex and fascinating woman." Alexander laughed. "That's an impressive understatement," he commented. "But I'm glad it was a positive experience. She has changed a lot these past few weeks." They walked side by side in comfortable silence for a few moments. "Alexander," Carmen finally said, gathering her courage, "about that proposal of yours, the second part, I think I'm ready to talk about that now." He stopped, turning to her with an attentive but cautious expression. "I'm listening," he said simply. Carmen took a deep breath. "I think I'd like to explore that possibility," she said with honesty. Slowly, grounded, aware of all the complexities involved. "But yes, I'd like to get to know you better, beyond the professional context." The smile that lit up Alexander's face was like dawn, gradual, warm, and full of promise. "That makes me very happy," he simply replied, extending his hand. Carmen accepted it, intertwining her fingers with his in a silent gesture. A gesture that symbolized not a definitive commitment, but the beginning of a path they were both willing to explore together. In the distance, Danny observed the scene and, to the surprise of everyone who knew the child well, he smiled. A small, but genuine smile that perfectly captured the feeling of renewed hope that permeated that moment. "What do you think of Eleanor Thorne's transformation? Do you believe it's genuine, or is there still an element of control?" Share your thoughts below. New horizons and a growing family. In the following months, many changes occurred. The New Horizons Therapeutic Center, born from Carmen's vision and the Thorne Foundation's support, was officially inaugurated, initially welcoming 10 children from low-income families for specialized treatments. The innovative approach developed by Carmen, combining conventional techniques with personalized methods based on each child's individual needs, began to gain recognition in the medical and educational community. Michael, now fully recovered from surgery, had become a constant presence at the center, first as a patient and little by little as a volunteer assistant, discovering in himself a natural talent for connecting with the most challenging children. His personal progress was remarkable, with a significant reduction in his crises and greater independence in daily activities. Danny, for his part, flourished under Carmen's constant care. He had started using short phrases, not just single words, and his anxiety episodes were increasingly rare. His connection with Michael had evolved into something close to a friendship, frequently sharing activities and common interests, despite the age difference. Carmen and Michael had moved into their own apartment, acquired with Alexander's financial help, but they continued to spend most of their time between the annex house and the therapeutic center. The relationship between Carmen and Alexander had developed gradually, with mutual respect and no pressure, evolving naturally from casual encounters to a more serious commitment that surprised everyone by the naturalness with which it was established. Eleanor, true to her promise, remained as a supporter and advisor, without undue interference. Her relationship with Carmen had transformed into something close to a respectful friendship, based on mutual admiration and shared love for Danny. One special afternoon, almost a year after their first encounter at the restaurant, the family gathered to celebrate Danny's 6th birthday. It was a simple but meaningful party, adapted to the child's needs, with few guests and many moments of tranquility between the celebrations. After the cake, while Danny explored his gifts with Michael by his side, Alexander approached Carmen, who watched the scene with obvious happiness. "We did it, didn't we?" he commented, putting his arm around her waist. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed we'd see Danny like this. So connected, so present." "He always had that potential," Carmen replied, leaning slightly against him. "He just needed someone who understood his unique way of being and communicating." Alexander gently kissed her temple. "You changed our lives, you know?" he said softly. "Not just Danny's, but mine too. You gave me hope back when I had already given up." Carmen smiled, turning to look at him. "You also changed mine," she replied sincerely. "You gave me the opportunity to fulfill my dream of helping children like Michael and Danny, and I found a family here that I never imagined having. They were interrupted by Eleanor, who approached discreetly. Forgive me for interrupting this moment, but Danny is calling for you, the matriarch informed with a warm smile. He wants to show you how he's using the new building set he got. Together, they headed towards the child who was eagerly waiting to share his creation. With simple, but clear words, Danny explained his construction. A representation of the annex house where Carmen worked with him, complete with small figures representing each member of the family. Family, he said, pointing to the figures. All together. Alexander's eyes filled with tears as he heard his son express such an abstract and emotional concept. Carmen, equally moved, knelt to the child's level. Yes, Danny, she confirmed softly. All together, a family. In that moment, as she observed the faces she had learned to love, Danny with his rare but precious smile, Michael with his proud gaze at his younger friend's achievement, Alexander with his expression of pure gratitude, and even Eleanor, whose transformation had been as surprising as it was significant, Carmen knew she had found her place in the world. The path hadn't been easy or straight. There had been obstacles, misunderstandings, prejudices to overcome. But each challenge only strengthened the bonds that now united them, creating a family not defined by blood, but by choice, respect, and unconditional love. A new beginning and a lasting legacy. Weeks later, on a quiet evening, Alexander invited Carmen to a special dinner at the restaurant where it all began. Le Bistro Gourmet had been reserved exclusively for the occasion, and Sophia, Carmen's former colleague, now the establishment's manager, greeted them personally. It's strange to be here as a customer, Carmen commented as they were led to the same table where they had first met. It feels like another life. In a way it was, Alexander replied, pulling out her chair. We were different people then. The dinner passed pleasantly, with light conversation and shared memories. When dessert was served, Alexander suddenly became more serious. Carmen, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, he began, with a slight hesitation in his voice. It seems important, she observed, noticing his expression. It's the most important thing, Alexander confirmed. Over the past year, I've witnessed your tireless dedication to Danny, to Michael, to the children at the center. I've seen your unwavering integrity, your boundless compassion, your strength in the face of adversities that would have broken less resilient people. He paused, searching for the right words. You've brought things back into my life that I thought were lost forever. Hope, joy, the ability to look to the future with anticipation instead of fear. Carmen felt her heart race, sensing where the conversation was heading. And the most incredible thing, Alexander continued, is that you achieved all this by simply being yourself. You never tried to be someone you're not. You never compromised your values or principles, even when it would have been easier to yield. He extended his hand across the table, taking hers. Danny loves you. Michael respects you. My mother, against all odds, immensely admires you. And I... Alexander took a deep breath. I love you, Carmen, deeply and completely. And I know it might seem too soon, or perhaps too complicated considering our different histories and contexts, but... He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal an elegant, but not ostentatious, ring. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, he quickly added, noticing the surprise in her eyes. Only that you consider the possibility of officially building the family we've already started to form, together. You, me, Danny, Michael, all together as our little architect said. Silent tears rolled down Carmen's face as she looked at the ring and the man offering it. Not a powerful billionaire, not an influential businessman, but simply Alexander, a dedicated father, a man of integrity who had learned his own lessons in humility and growth. I don't need time to think about it, she finally replied, her voice firm despite the emotion. My answer is yes. Yes to building this family together, to continuing the work we started, to facing any challenges the future brings us. The joy on Alexander's face, as he slid the ring onto her finger, was an image Carmen knew she would cherish forever. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her, which, as she would later discover, was exactly the case. The future that lay before them would not be without challenges. There would be adjustments, negotiations, difficult moments, as in any family. Danny's condition would require constant care and attention. The therapeutic center would continue to demand dedication and continuous innovation. Differences in background and experiences would occasionally create friction that would need to be resolved with patience and mutual understanding. But as she looked at the ring on her finger, a symbol of a commitment that went far beyond the conventional, Carmen felt a quiet certainty that she was on the right path. Not because everything would be perfect or easy, but because they had built a solid foundation of respect, honesty, and true love. That kind of love that doesn't ignore differences or difficulties, but faces them together, with courage and determination. A wedding, a legacy, and unconditional love. Some months later, in an intimate ceremony held in the mansion's gardens, Carmen and Alexander formalized their union, surrounded only by the truly important people in their lives. Danny, impeccable in his small suit, surprised everyone by perfectly fulfilling his role as ring bearer, carrying the rings with seriousness and pride. Michael, elegant and confident as never before, served as best man, and his simple, yet deeply emotional speech brought tears even to Eleanor. The matriarch, for her part, had fully embraced her new role as advisor and supporter, contributing to the ceremony with discreet suggestions, never impositions. Her transformation was perhaps the most powerful testament to how genuine love can change people, break down barriers, and heal old wounds. The New Horizons Therapeutic Center continued to grow, expanding its capacity to serve more children and establishing partnerships with universities to train new professionals in the methodology developed by Carmen, now formally known as the Rodriguez-Thorne method. Michael, inspired by his sister's work, decided to resume his studies, determined to become an occupational therapist specializing in children with special needs. Danny continued his development at his own pace, with significant progress interspersed with periods of stability, exactly as it should be. His connection with Carmen only strengthened over time, now complemented by an equally special relationship with his father, who had learned to fully understand and accept his son just as he was. The social differences that initially seemed so insurmountable between Carmen and the Thorne family gradually lost importance, replaced by shared values and common goals. The mansion, which once seemed intimidating, simply became home, a place of acceptance, warmth, and unconditional love. And so, what had begun as a casual encounter in an elegant restaurant, a waitress helping a millionaire client's autistic son, transformed into a journey of growth, healing, and unity that none of those involved could have foreseen. Because as Carmen used to remind the parents of the children who came to the center, the greatest miracles don't happen suddenly or dramatically. They unfold day by day, in small moments of connection, in constant choices of love and acceptance, in the willingness to see beyond appearances and find the unique beauty in every human being, regardless of their differences or challenges. And perhaps that was the true gift she gave to the Thorne family. Not just therapeutic techniques or communication methods, but the fundamental reminder that every person, no matter how different or challenging they may initially seem, carries within themselves unexplored potentials and an unlimited capacity to love and be loved. And you, what did you think of this story of triumph and love? Tell us in the comments what touched your heart the most. If you know someone who works with special needs children, share this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this.